Welcome to another episode of the .NET Show. On this episode, we're going to look at IIS 7.0, specifically focusing on the features that will help developers as well as the IT pro manage their websites better. But before we get to that, let's check in with Erica and the news.
Hello and welcome to the MSDN News Update. I'm Erica Wiechers. In late March, MSDN launched a new developer center targeted specifically at the Windows Live platform. The Windows Live platform aims to open Windows Live services to create shared opportunity for developers and businesses. The new developer center offers developers a one-stop shop for the Windows Live platform, including information on getting started with Windows Live services, latest documentation and APIs, access to community areas and relevant blogs, and announcements of future releases and innovations. On April 4th, at the BioIT World Magazine World Life Sciences Conference and Expo, Microsoft announced the formation of the BioIT Alliance, a cross-industry group working to further integrate science and technology as a first step toward making personalized medicine a reality. The Alliance unites the pharmaceutical, biotechnology, hardware, and software industries to explore new ways to share complex biomedical data and collaborate among multidisciplinary teams to ultimately speed the pace of drug discovery and development. Founding members of the Alliance include Accelrus Software, Affymetrix, Amylin Pharmaceuticals, Applied Biosystems, and the Scripps Research Institute, among more than a dozen industry leaders. The Alliance also announced its first project, the Collaborative Molecular Environment, a data management solution to help make research more efficient. On April 5th, Microsoft disclosed the roadmap and first set of features of its upcoming release of Microsoft Speech Server 2007. Beginning in May, beta testers will have the opportunity to preview and provide feedback on Speech Server 2007, which is planned for release in late 2006. Speech Server 2007 is Microsoft's next-generation speech and telephony platform to help contact centers and businesses meet the challenge of reducing costs while improving automated customer service over the telephone. On April 6th, Microsoft Game Studios announced it has purchased UK-based Lionhead Studios, a leading video game developer and creator of the game Fable. Lionhead Studios will immediately begin creating content exclusively for the Xbox 360 and Microsoft Windows platforms. The companies previously worked together on the popular role-playing games Fable for Xbox and Fable: The Lost Chapters for Xbox and Windows, which have collectively surpassed the 2 million global unit sales milestone, making Fable the best-selling role-playing franchise on the Xbox platform. With this announcement, Lionhead Studios becomes the latest member of Microsoft Game Studios, joining such game creators as Bungie Studios, Ensemble Studios, Fossa Studio, and Rare Limited. And this has been the MSDN News Update. I'm Erica Wiechers.
Welcome back. Like I said, today we're going to talk about IIS 7.0. And here to share some ideas about what IIS 7.0 is and how it might help the IT pro as well as the developer in the audience, we have Scott Guthrie and Bill Staples. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
So what exactly is your relationship to IIS 7.0 and what makes you the definitive experts to talk to this audience?
Well, I'm the product unit manager for IIS. That means I manage the developer, test, and program managers that actually build the product.
Scott?
And I'm a general manager in the developer division and run a couple of teams, including the IIS team, the ASP.NET Atlas team, the Common Language Runtime team, and a few other teams as well.
So it sounds like you do more work than Bill does.
Definitely.
No.
So which one of you does the more important work on IIS 7.0 then?
Definitely
you because
Bill.
you're managing?
No, definitely Bill.
Now I know you mentioned ASP.NET in there. What exactly is the relationship between ASP.NET and IIS 7.0? When I think about programming the web server and stuff like that, I'm always thinking ASP.NET. And I know that some of the IT pros guys are always thinking about IIS 7.0 because they're not really touching the ASP.NET stuff at all. So are they separate entities? Are they the same thing going on, just different names, or what exactly?
Well, historically, they've been separate. You know, they've shipped at separate time frames, And some of the concepts, obviously, although they're designed to work together, have not been as unified as we'd like in the past. So there's been two different admin experiences, two different configuration experiences, two different developer extensibility experiences.
Kind of like peanut butter and chocolate, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
peanut butter and jelly. They nicely work together. But what we really try to do in the IIS 7.0 timeframe is kind of unify the two quite a bit, and really kind of come together with a kind of a nice holistic experience where the two not just work together, but really work well together. And where possible, we've tried to unify concepts like configuration and the admin tool. And we've also then looked to figure out kind of how can we have a nice, rich extensibility model across the product, and likewise have a great administration story for managing it. And so, although they're still separate things, I think from a customer experience, when you install IIS 7 and enable ASP.NET on top of it, you're going to see a really nice unified product.
Now, does this mean that programmers are going to be needing to deal with IIS 7.0 stuff more, and that IT pro people are going to have to deal with ASP.NET stuff more, or just that the two are going to just work better together?
I think at the base level, those work much better together. Developers today have to know IIS to a large extent, because that ultimately is what ASP.NET's running on. And IT pros today have to understand both IIS and ASP.NET if they're running an ASP.NET application. So to a large extent, what we try to do is just make them work better together. The second level thing, though, that we've then tried to do is say, well, how can we even go further than making them work well together, but really enable new scenarios that weren't possible? So provide developers with a much easier way for them to configure not just ASP.NET settings within their application development process, but also IIS ones. How can they go ahead and extend IIS to take advantage of richer capabilities or plug in at a lower level? And then likewise, from an administration standpoint, how can administrators much more easily manage dynamic applications that developers within their organizations have potentially built?
And so I'm assuming these are the things that IIS 7 brings to the table that IIS 6 probably didn't quite have as full featured capabilities on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. I think if you look across the product, the feature depth, in each of the different areas, there's pretty exciting stuff.
So what do you view with thinking about IIS 6 and 5 and 4 and beforehand? What do you see as some of the key issues that the IT pros out in the audience might have been facing with IIS in dealing with administration, things like that?
Well, I'd say the first thing, obviously, we always talk about with IIS and IT professionals is security. And for good reason, IT professionals are very concerned about the security of their web server and any server in their data center environment. And we took a lot of steps with IIS 6 to make sure that the web server was locked down by default, so that there was minimum attack surface for the web server, and IT professionals could enable the features they need when they need them, so that they only have exposed to the internet or to their corporate environment just the features that they're using, essentially. And that was a big paradigm shift from IIS 5 and previous versions of IIS, where we really just tried to make it as easy as possible to get out the web server. And so we enabled everything by default. In fact, IIS 5 was actually installed by default as part of the operating system, which led to lots of bad things, obviously, in IIS's past. With IIS 6, though, we took that new approach. We locked down the server by default, and we focused a lot on security. And the result is a great web server. We've now passed 3 years since we shipped the product in March of 2003, and we still have yet to see a critical security vulnerability made available, a patch made available for IIS 6.
I think that's fabulous.
Yeah, it's a pretty great track record. So the bar is very high with IIS 7, and we're taking that even a step further with IIS 7. So with IIS 6, as I said, we locked the server down by default. Basically, we configured everything to be off by default, and with a configuration switch, you could turn things on. So if you wanted, for example, CGI applications to run, you could enable that CGI application. With IIS 7, we've taken it a step further, and we've said, if you're not using CGI, if you're not using legacy ISAPI feature that we provide, you shouldn't even need to install it on the box. And so we've taken all the core features of IIS, and we've actually componentized them into separate modules, if you will. And we now support this very fine-grained installation experience, which allows you to just put the bits down on the web server that you're going to need and not install anything you don't need. That's great from a security perspective. It's also great from an overall patching and maintenance perspective, because it means if a hotfix comes out or a service pack comes out that fixes CGI and you're not using CGI, hey, you never have to install that patch.
So it's kind of like I don't know, Lego building blocks. It's like you actually pick exactly what components you want to have run, and only those components are available to security issues or whatever. But it also the memory footprint on the system, the speed of access to the system, so you're not having other stuff spinning up and spinning down every time the system is running.
Exactly. Yeah. Just to compare and contrast, I think IIS 6 had somewhere around 10, 12 installation components that you could choose from. With IIS 7, we have now more than 40 components that you can select from, and it's actually fairly similar in terms of feature footprint. It's just that we've now broken out the features individually into separate installable modules.
But doesn't this complicate, though, the job of the IT pro? Because now he's got to think about this process. Okay, what components am I needing to install and keeping them straight and stuff like that?
Well, you might think that, but it's actually not much more difficult than it was with IIS 6, because I said, again, we locked down the server by default with IIS 6, and IT professionals got in the experience going in and enabling the ASP application or enabling ASP.NET or the CGI application they wanted. It's a very similar experience now. It's just it happens during setup instead of after setup.
So one nice thing is that it's very well integrated into the overall setup experience in Windows. And so you can logically think of it like going to add or remove programs today. And now you can drill into IIS, and we have kind of intelligent defaults, so you're not kind of having to try to figure out, oh, do I want this module or that module? You can very easily kind of expand kind of a system tree and choose selectively, oh, do I want dynamic capabilities or not? And if I do, what are the couple different buckets of dynamic functionality that I care about? And so it's a relatively easy experience. And the beauty is, because the bits aren't installed on the box, if you don't check that box, or that checkbox in the installation program, again, you don't have to patch it. You don't have to worry about any kind of vector being opened up without you understanding that. And from a memory footprint and overall throughput perspective, you get benefits as well.
Now, you mentioned this happens during setup. Can you also do outside of setup? So if I've already installed the system and I want to make a change to it, can I install more components from that standpoint?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, again, with IIS 7, we don't install as part of the default operating system. So the installation of experience for IIS can happen after the OS install. And then you can always go back and add and remove modules, add and remove features anytime you want.
What about new modules coming up?
Great segue into probably one of the most important things for developers, which is we've built all of these features for IIS, even the existing ones like CGI support or our existing ISAPI support, on top of a new public API. So for the first time, our developer team building the IIS feature set is using the same Win32 API that we're going to evangelize to customers and make possible for them to actually build features on top of the product itself as well. So we intend by that to both provide all the existing IIS 7 features and also over time build additional modules on top of this public API set that we make available on the web as part of an R2 style release for Longhorn Server when that comes out, and in future releases of IIS.
And the really great thing is that the API supports both a native, sort of like a Win32 style API, as well as a managed.
All right.
Managed.NET programming model. And the managed programming model is the same HTTP module and HTTP handler programming model that ASP.NET supports today. So if you're an ASP.NET developer and you've ever written to that API before, hey, it's the same API, but it now lets you do a lot more. And so you can basically choose as a component vendor or as kind of an advanced infrastructure developer to very easily go ahead and build your own modules that plug into the system. And you can now do literally everything that the core IIS development teams actually can do as well. So you can plug in at that very low level. So if you want to implement a more advanced authentication scheme in your system, or you want to replace the directory listing module with a prettier version or one that integrates with a photo album system or something like that, it's now trivially easy to do. And we'll even within Visual Studio have project templates, so you can basically download, say for example, C# Express edition, do a file new, select IIS 7 module, and you can basically in 20 or 30 lines of C# or VB code go ahead and build a core infrastructure component that plugs in, not just for ASP.NET content, but for all content on the system.
Oh, wow.
And the extensibility goes even further than just the core server itself, building new features for the core server like Scott's talking about. We actually now have extensibility in the configuration system itself, as well as the administration environment. So if you're a component vendor that wants to build one of those modules that Scott just talked about, you can not only plug into IIS at the right level, using both native or managed code. But you can build a configuration section that configures the module. You can also build a UI plugin that plugs into our administration tool and have a seamless integrated feature as if the IIS team had built it in the first place.
Yeah. So we really think that's going to create kind of a whole rich ecosystem and community around IIS. And you know, as an administrator, the benefit is you'll be able to download these modules and without having to write any code or hire anyone to do something, very easily plug them into the system, use the built-in IIS command line tools to manage them, use the built-in IIS7 admin tool that's a GUI-based environment to configure them. And then if you're a developer, the great thing is you now have a lot of power to take advantage of. And the end result we think is a pretty fun and pretty powerful kind of environment.
Now, it sounds like with these components availability, that Microsoft could also come up with additional components later on down the line that actually enhance the capability of IIS 7.0. Is that something we have planned to do?
Absolutely. Yeah, we'd love to make dozens of features available for IIS 7 on top of IIS 7, even before the next operating system release.
Yeah. And a core part of our strategy, both in the IIS space as well as a lot of the other products that we're doing, say, for example, in the developer division in Windows, is to kind of design these products so that they're very extensible, and the way they're architected really facilitates both other people plugging in, but even more importantly, people within Microsoft plugging in. And so we'll have this agility to basically, when customers ask for a feature, be able to turn around and, hey, in a couple of months, actually ship something on the web for them, and get into this regular cadence of just providing lots of value over and over again for people to take advantage of. So we hope it's a pretty powerful customer experience as well.
And if I put my IT pro hat on, one thing that strikes me, I'm hearing, okay, suddenly now I can install components from Microsoft, my own developers order from a third party, and they now have, full-on access to my systems. Might that not be a security issue, though?
No. So one important thing is, for example, if you're building a managed module, you can lock it down so that it only runs, for example, in the context of an application. So it's similar if a application developer gave you an ASP.NET page today. You can do more things with this module, but you're still scoped to the security of that application. And likewise, if you're building, say, a native module and you're hosting it within an application, you're not running in the kernel, you're not running in any kind of protected mode space. You're actually running, in the context of our worker process accounts. And so you as an administrator have full control over locking down kind of what that process can and can't do, what those capabilities are. And so
so it's like using code access security or something like that for setting that up?
Yeah, that's one option. You can either use process level security, so you can lock it down sort of like an NT account permission, or you can use code access security for managed code. The other thing that we've done is with IIS 7 is spent a lot of time focusing on kind of diagnostics and on kind of tracing and kind of being able to detect error conditions and identifying and troubleshooting kind of the system. And so one other big benefit of IIS 7 is whether it's with a module that you get from someone else or whether it's one of our built-in modules or just an application that's being deployed on the box, you'll be able to, as an administrator, actually trace what's going on in the system and get detailed kind of diagnostics about what requests are currently executing. Where are they in the system? Are they in the authentication module right now, or are they in the page handler? And be able, as an administrator, very easily figure out what's going on in the system and identify when you have either performance bottlenecks or configuration errors or things like that to kind of identify what the problem is and take steps to fix it. So we think we try to spend a lot of time not just on providing lots of power APIs, but also really provide kind of a great IT pro experience so that the IT pro consuming components built with those APIs can really do it in a rich way, but in an easy way that isn't going to add time to their schedule.
And the ability to monitor what's going on in the system and better take advantage of things.
Exactly.
Now, in the previous episode, we talked about WMI scripting. Does WMI scripting hook into some of these new features? So I could be utilizing some of those scripting capabilities to generate either reports or monitoring capabilities and stuff like that?
Yes, in fact, with IIS 6, we provided a WMI provider that allowed you to script against the IIS metabase, the IIS configuration store with IIS 6. With IIS 7, we now have a WMI provider that wraps the entire web platform configuration. So you can now write WMI scripts against IIS configuration settings or ASP.NET configuration settings as well.
Even better, if you build your own custom configuration section. So if you're an application developer and you build the the order processing pipeline configuration element and define your own schema settings within it, you can actually expose those through the WMI API. And so the administrator can script against those just like they can the built-in ASP.NET and IIS settings, which is pretty powerful.
Yeah. Now, what exactly is the shipping time frame for IIS? Because it sounds pretty exciting, and I want to start running it right now and getting installed on my web service to take care of my websites for me.
Well, IIS 7 is actually available right now for both the Vista CTP releases as well as Longhorn Server CTP releases. It was not in the Beta 1 release of Longhorn Client and Server, but it is now checked in and available, and will be coming out with the first big beta release here with Beta 2 coming up for both Vista and Longhorn Server. We plan on basically shipping the product with Vista and also Longhorn Server. Vista is sort of our developer platform, if you will, where we expect developers to be seeing the product for the first time, using it to build applications, to build modules like we talked about. And then Longhorn Server is our production server environment where IT professionals will be deploying it for production serving.
What about on XP Pro? Is it going to run on XP Pro?
It won't run on XP Pro as of right now. It's a Longhorn and Vista.
Okay, so it requires, if I've currently got a web system out there, I've got to upgrade the system to Windows Vista in order to get the stuff running. And then Vista Server is going to be happening a little bit after the Vista Home Professional Edition and stuff like that. So I might even have to wait a little bit longer for the server edition of Vista.
That's correct. The client operating system and the server operating system ship a little bit after each other. The server operating system comes a little bit after to add that extra level of quality for production server environments.
Now, you mentioned being on the client system, so you're just talking about Windows Vista Pro, or I can't remember all the different SKUs coming out from Windows Vista sometimes.
One nice thing is the IIS 7 for the first time is going to be on both the Pro Edition SKUs as well as the Home Edition SKUs.
So the Home Edition is SKUs too.
So if you have Windows XP Home today, one of the common requests is, hey, I'd love to have IIS 6 or IIS 5 installed on it. Today that isn't an option. You can use the built-in web server that comes with VS 2005 or the Visual Web Developer Express Edition, but you can't run IIS on Home.
Which is kind of like a mini version of ASP.NET or something like
that,
right?
Yeah, it's a mini version. But with IIS 7, you'll be able to run it on both the professional editions as well as the Home Edition.
So that means my mom can be an IT pro now.
She could indeed, yeah. And you can also, it's also designed both, as Bill was mentioning, for developers, but it also is, if you want to have a very small, you're not going to be running eBay on it or MySpace, which are two IIS customers today, but you might, for example, want to run your own home website or your own blog or something like that. It certainly supports that as well. And so, it provides a nice, easy way. You can go ahead and get started, and you can go ahead and deploy your sites using a client operating system.
I mean, plus, running a web server on your system, it doesn't necessarily always have to mean exposing on the internet. Sometimes the functionality that you get from a website running SPX pages and stuff like that is quite handy just for on my own little laptop that I'm floating around the airplane with or something like that, because it's just an application. Sometimes they go to the internet, but they don't have to.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think this opens up some opportunities there.
Yeah.
Now, especially when tied to something like the Visual Studio Express SKUs of various sorts, whether it's VB or the C# or stuff like that, the web developer, this really is opening up the platform for people to really extend themselves into what it means to be writing web pages, web applications on a full-blown system like IIS 7.0.
The other thing that's really useful about it is in a hosting environment. So you could certainly run your application locally using IIS 7 on your home or pro machine. But once you actually want to go and say your drink site, if you want to go ahead and put it on in a hosting account because you want to get more load and you don't want people necessarily hitting your machine, you can go ahead and get now an IIS hosting account. Some cases it's as cheap as say $2 or $3 a month now. You'll be able to go ahead and FTP up your content onto that server, and you'll be able to use the IIS 7 admin tool that's built into your client operating system to actually connect to the remote site. And so that's one of the big features we've added in IIS 7 is this what we call delegation, which is the ability for a server admin to optionally provide some degree of admin support to someone who's not an admin on the box. And so, for example, a hoster could say, I'm going to let Robert's site be managed by Robert remotely over HTTP using and let him configure these 8 settings and only these 8 settings. These other 30 I'm not going to let him touch, but these 8, sure, I'll let him touch. And you can use the built-in IIS7 admin tool in order to manage that remotely. And so it provides you much more control as a user of that website, and makes it much easier to go ahead and configure and manage things.
That sounds really handy. I mean, I've got a bunch of friends of mine that have websites on some of those bulk rate servers, GoDaddy and stuff like that. And one of the problems they're always running into is that since they are just kind of taking a little teeny piece of pie slice off of this big server, they don't have access to turning on some of the stuff that if they own the entire server, they could. So you're saying that this now allow them to turn on some of those capabilities that previously you had to have a full-blown web server for, rather than just a simple account.
Very common request from IT professionals today with IIS 6 and earlier versions is IIS was previously built as an admin-only system. So if you wanted to touch any configuration setting, if you wanted to run our administration tool, everything from the basic default document setting for your website, you had to be a system administrator to touch that setting. And as Scott said, with IIS7 now, we've opened up both the configuration as well as the administration tool to allow for site owners and developers to tweak those settings. And it's all based on what the IT professional decides to delegate out to that audience.
So what do you think, if you're an IT pro person in the audience, what do you think are the key things that are hitting them right now that they're understanding about IIS 7.0 that they say, my God, I can't wait for I can actually install that on the systems I'm operating?
Well, I think this delegation feature we just talked about is probably one of the biggest, in that it enables them to lower their cost of ownership, essentially, by delegating out some level of control for settings that they really don't care about for the server. That's really a website setting or an application setting. So it allows them to offload that and allow for self-service of the application itself. The diagnostic stuff that we started getting into a little bit earlier as well is probably one big thing. Today, IIS is typically a very black box when it comes to troubleshooting failures that happen on the server. The requests come into the server, and most of the time they come out okay. When they don't come out okay and there's an error, it's so hard to figure out what's going on. And as Scott said, we've built a number of features around that to make it much easier. So I think they're going to love that in terms of IIS 7 support.
Yeah, being able to figure out with a high throughput, high production server app, what's going wrong when something happens wrong. If you can cut that down from hours to minutes to seconds, that just saves so much time and so much effort, and really gives you a lot more confidence in terms of, I know what to do when something's happening. And so a lot of that kind of self-servicing and that ability to kind of figure out, what's happening in the system, why is something failing, and how do I get the information so that I can figure out really quickly how to fix it, it's just sort of invaluable.
I mean, especially with a lot of these web systems are growing so large in size. You have these big, gigantic web farms you're trying to deal with, and the IT pro is constantly being just hammered by trying to keep up to date on what exactly is going on in his systems and monitoring it all. And so all this stuff's just going to make it easier for him, makes his job easier. He can now take and relax a little bit longer and sit in the coffee shop and still be raking in the big bucks because he's now working IT pro, right?
Yeah. And I think also the ability to kind of configure exactly what the system's doing. So in other words, what components you install or what don't you install and what the footprint looks like also means that from an IT pro planning perspective, you can go ahead and you have much more control over your destiny as to, what am I going to put on the system or not? How much load do I think it's going to need, or what capabilities is it going to require? And you can kind of pay as you go from a complexity perspective and from an install perspective. And that really gives you a lot of benefits as you're getting started, but even more importantly, you have the confidence as your system grows and grows and grows that you're scaling appropriately and you're not adding exponential more complexity as you introduce systems into the network.
Now, all these things are pretty exciting about what IIS 7 is, and there's still a little bit of time to go before IIS 7 comes out. But there's still the future beyond that. Can you give us any hints on what we might see coming out of IIS 7 beyond IIS 7.0 release?
Well, actually, one of the things we're working on in parallel to IIS 7 is a system that will allow for both deployment and management of applications and websites on server farms. So it's very common today, if you have a successful application, for you to start scaling it out. If not for performance reasons, because there's so much demand for that website, than for reliability reasons, right? If you have a mission critical application, you probably don't want it sitting on one web server and only one web server, because that's a single point of failure. So it's very common to take the application and start it up on 2 servers or 4 or 5 or 10. And as the site becomes more popular, continue that level of scale. One of the challenges with IIS today is both that deployment of the site across multiple servers. Imagine if you want to set a particular IIS setting on every one of the web servers. Essentially today you have to do that one web server at a time, one machine at a time. And when it comes to managing, like let's say you want to look at the log files across all those front-end web servers. Again, you have to do it one server at a time. So we're building a set of tools that will be available, we hope sometime later this year, that will allow it to be much easier to both deploy applications across a server farm, as well as do basic management operations on the server farm itself.
Mm-hmm. But it just makes everything more efficient from that standpoint.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
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 Mm-hmm.
Now, what about if I'm an IT pro guy in the audience, and I'm now saying, okay, I know I want this. Where do I find more information about what I need to do to get IIS up running in my system? And once I've got it installed, whether in the beta format or whatever, more information on actually how to use some of these features and capabilities.
Well, one of the things that we're very excited about is we're just about ready to launch the www.iis.net website. And that'll be available sometime in the coming month, and that's probably the best place to go for all information about IIS, including existing versions of IIS, IIS 6 and 5, that are continuing to be at as well as IIS 7.
So you're actually catching up with ASP.NET website, right?
You are,
Yeah.
and hopefully surpassing it.
www.asp.net's been sort of hugely successful, and is more focused on kind of developers. www.is.net, you're going to see kind of how-to videos, you're going to see great tutorials, really focused on the IT pro as well as the developer. And as Bill mentioned, tons of information for existing releases of IIS, as well as kind of a great roadmap and a great guide, so that as you start thinking about IIS 7 and how you can take advantage of it, it's really easy to learn the features, really easy to kind of come up to speed on how things now work, and even try out demos and try out samples, and really be kind of a great conduit and a great forum for IT professionals to get together and chat and ask questions and
So
learn.
there'll be a discussion forum as well then.
Discussion
forums.
blogs, so you can subscribe to kind of articles of the week and blogs from development team members on the IIS team, and it should be a really great place to just sort of, if you're an IIS admin today, you got to go to that site. Definitely want to subscribe and hang out there, because you'll learn a lot of great stuff.
Maybe a little dating forum on the side or something like that.
Yeah, probably not.
I think one of the features we're probably most excited about with that site is we've worked with the Microsoft Virtual Labs team to actually make a build of IIS 7 running on Longhorn server available through the website. So you'll be able to actually try out IIS 7 without ever having to install it on one of your own hardware.
So you're like remote desktoping into it. And
You're actually using a virtual server. So there's a virtual server client that installs in your web browser, and you're actually using that remotely over the internet.
Oh, nice.
It's very exciting.
Yeah. And what's the time frame for this?
It will be available at the Beta 2 launch coming up for Vista. So,
Okay.
So the next 4 to 5 weeks.
So it might actually be up now, since this show's going to be out in about 4 weeks after this episode.
Yeah. So definitely go there now, www.is.net. And if it's, there will be something there right now, and if it's not live at the time of the show, which hopefully it will be, we'll have a coming soon with a little bit more information on when to come.
Good. Well, thanks for joining us. I'm sure our audience appreciated learning out some of the ideas that are coming out in IIS 7.0 and how that relates to ASP.NET and what they can look forward to with Windows Vista.
Thanks for having us.
thanks.
So hopefully that gives you some ideas about what IIS 7.0 is and what you can be able to do with it once it comes out, installing and running it on your Windows Vista system. After this short break, we'll come back and we'll take a look at what it means to actually use IIS 7.0 and what it means to the IT pro and maybe even the developer in the audience. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back. Now, in our previous segment, Scott and Bill showed us or talked about some pretty exciting things that IIS 7 can do. And now I think it's about time we actually showed you what those things look like so you can see for yourself how much better the user experience is going to be on IIS 7.0 for IT pros as well as developers. Joining me again is Scott or actually changed places. So that's Scott and Bill. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks for having us.
So you've got IIS 7 installed on this build of Windows Vista. I guess it's like a brand new build of Windows
Brand new
Vista.
build came out just a few days ago, actually.
Yeah, that's pretty good. And so an IIS 7 is part of the build now?
Yes, it is. In fact, it's both part of Vista builds as well as Longhorn server builds now. And this is a Vista Beta 2 build, so it's getting ready for the Beta 2 release.
And we were talking earlier, you're actually now using this as what we call your dog food system. So you're using this as your main
I'm
system
actually
now.
using this as my main system. So all my email and PowerPoint and Word documents and all that I do on my Vista machine now.
Let's ship it, you know.
It's working pretty good. I'm excited. You know, we talked a lot about componentization in the last part and how we've done a much better job at modularizing IIS, making it so that you can install just the components, the features you want when you need them. So I thought we might want to start out there actually and talk about, show off at least that set of components and how you'd go about installing it on Windows Vista.
Sure, yeah, because you know, if I was an IT pro guy, I'd be kind of concerned just about the difficulty. 'Cause, you know, like you guys said it was going to be easy, but I'd rather see how easy it is to take and actually manage this stuff.
You bet. So this is Vista, as I said, and so I'm going to have to go to Control Panel to install IIS as an optional component for Windows Vista. On Longhorn Server, there's a slightly different setup experience. They have on Longhorn Server what we call the role management tool. And it's basically a wizard whereby you go through and decide what server roles you want to enable for the Windows server. So you can enable, for example, a domain controller there, file server, print server, and of course web server where you'd install IIS. On Vista, we go to the Control Panel and go into Programs. And here on the Installed Programs menu, we have Turn On or Off Windows Features. And that's actually where you go to install IIS. So we'll pop that up. And you'll see there's lots of optional components that I've got here available on Vista. This one being IIS, Internet Information Services, under which you can see the top level things you can install are FTP server, our web management tool, and also the web server itself under World Wide Web Services. Inside here you see several groups of features, including app development features. Inside here you'd see things like ASP and ASP.NET, the CGI capability I mentioned earlier, ISAPI. You can also see common HP features like default document, directory browsing. So installing any one of these features is as easy as checking the box and clicking OK.
So these are corresponding to what you're calling the components you're installing, right?
Yeah, each one of these is a separate individual DLL that gets installed on the machine and configured for its default setup, basically. And I've gone ahead and I've done the default install of IIS, plus I've added ASP.NET and Classic ASP for parts of our demos today. The default install experience takes about a minute and a half. Once you click the OK button, a minute and a half later, you have a fully functional web server ready to go.
You're still using the default, the old ASP stuff because Scott hasn't updated the code yet to do ASP.NET yet, right? Is that the reason?
No, one of my demos, if we get to it today, uses a Classic ASP page to reproduce an issue. So yeah, I've got both of them on here. So
It's
that's
hard to have a problem with ASP.NET, so that's why we're using
I
it.
see.
yeah, it's so hard to recreate problems. No. So that's the componentization. That's how it's expressed through setup, and that's how you go and get IIS going so you can experiment with it.
And so you could have easily at that point in time actually removed things just by taking unchecking one of those things, and it would have just removed it the same way you can remove things in add remove programs today.
Right. Yep. It's that easy. So next thing I thought we'd show off is the new administration tool. That's probably the thing that most users are going to pop up next. They want to see what the GUI experience looks like for IIS. So I popped it up here, and you notice it looks a little bit different than the current admin tool for IIS. Still have the familiar tree view over here on the left-hand side where you can see application pools and the websites on your server. But here in the center of the admin tool, you see more of a control panel-like view. And this is basically the list of features that you can now configure and install, or sorry, configure and manage through IIS. And this list of features is not just IIS settings. We have now a single admin tool for both IIS and ASP.NET. So see all the web platform features here and available for configuration in the admin tool. And then over here on the right-hand side of the tool, we have basic tasks for the particular scope you're managing. So I'm clicking here on my server. I can click on view app pools or view sites, or even stop the server itself if I want to stop it right here. One of the things that I also wanted to show off here is the delegation capability. We talked about how IT professionals now have the ability with IIS 7 to delegate out a set of features to site owners or developers to give them some level of control over their application. That's right here under the feature delegation. Basically, I can click on that, and you'll see a list of all the features that are available on the server. And they all have this delegation status. So for example, membership roles and users is currently set to configuration read-write. If I want to prohibit users from configuring that particular feature, I can mark it here as read-only, or I can also remove the delegation for that particular feature entirely. Read-only means basically if a delegated user connects up to the website to manage it, they'd be able to see the configuration but not change it. And if I remove delegation altogether, when they connect up to the site, they won't even see the feature at all. It'll be basically absent from that control panel view that we saw earlier. And I can do that with any of the features here. So basically, all the common IIS and ASP.NET features that you're familiar with, things like modules, default document, directory browsing, they're all now easily controlled through this feature delegation UI.
And how do you then assign that to particular users or groups of users?
This particular UI that I have is the Vista Client UI. So I don't have the ability to actually create other administrators for websites. But if I was using the Longhorn Server UI tool, I'd have another icon here called Administrators. And that's where I'd go in and create both assign Windows users to a particular website, and I can also actually create non-Windows users. So create an account for them. They can use their credentials to connect up and manage their website. So that's the new delegation experience for IIS 7. Why don't we actually deploy a sample website and kind of see the basic experience of getting a website up and running and some of the new features that IIS 7 provides for that experience. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my inetpub www root directory. This is the home directory that the default website is assigned to. And I've actually built some sample content here in demo site. I'm just going to actually copy the files from there into my www root directory. You'll see that I've got a home page here named home.html, style sheet, and then some subdirectories here with various images in. One of those parts of my site that I wanted to show off is this gallery. These are actually photos I've taken over the past few years that I wanted to highlight on my website, so I've got them posted here.
Did you take those pictures yourself?
Yeah, I actually did. When I'm not busy working on IIS, that's what I like to do for fun. So I've got the site deployed now. We can go ahead and pull it up. And we'll see, oops, I didn't get the home page. Instead, I got this interesting custom error. Now, IIS users are actually pretty familiar with these errors. And sometimes they can be kind of frustrating when you get an error like this and you're not sure what to do. Fortunately, with IIS 7, one of the big things we've done, we talked about diagnostics, is we've made the errors a lot easier to read and use. So for example, this particular error tells me, I'm getting a forbidden error, but it tells me the web server is not configured to display the contents of the directory. And it even gives me a list of solutions here, step by step, that I can go and apply to fix this particular error. And you'll see this on all types of errors now, from these 403.14 error to 404 and 500 error. So lots of more information available for IT professionals and developers to help troubleshoot the situation.
And of course, I'm sure there's probably people in the audience right now, they're kind of saying it's about time. But
Yeah. Now, we basically from this error, we see, oh, the cause for this is a default document has not been configured for the requested URL. And if we look at the home page, it was named home.html. That's not a default document name that IIS recognizes. And it tells me how to go fix it. Let's go ahead and follow the steps. Basically, it's telling me, open up the admin tool, go to the default document feature. Here's default document feature. And here's a list of files that it recognizes. So let's go ahead and add in home.html. Actually, let's clear that list and add just ours, home.html. Click apply. Tells us the changes were saved successfully. So we should be able to just refresh the page. And voila, we have the home page with a picture of me from this morning when I first woke up. Just kidding.
Boy, that makeup really worked good on you, didn't it?
It took a while, but we got there. Now, one of the interesting things about this demo is not only did we were able to use the UI to configure a home page, but we were actually able to demonstrate another feature behind the scenes. If we expand our content directory here, you'll see a new file was created, web.config.
So that wasn't there in the files you actually copied over to the system?
No, that wasn't there. Only the top row was there. And we have this web.config file. Let's go ahead and open it up. I've got Visual Web Developer. And we'll see here a web.config file. And that's probably very familiar to ASP.NET developers out there. This is how you configure ASP.NET today. Well, the good news is it's now how you also can configure IIS settings. The same file, the same kind of format that you're familiar with, can now configure both IIS and ASP.NET settings. So it's pretty cool. This is one of the ways that developers' lives will be much easier with IIS 7, because they can now have a lot more access to IIS configuration settings. And they can also copy configuration for both IIS and ASP.NET from their developer machine into the QA server and into production, and hand off IIS configuration just by copying it. IT pros are going to love that as well. Today, it's a very manual process. Basically, developers end up calling the IT professional or meeting with them and saying, here are the 10 steps you have to go through to configure IIS for my application.
Going into certain dialogues, clicking on certain buttons, making certain settings and stuff like that. Whereas, I mean, the IT pros probably not want to be editing XML files. They like having the tools to do it within a certain scope. But this now takes and allows both sides of the coin to work equally well.
The nice thing is if an application was copied onto a server and the developer actually copied the configuration with it, if the admin then opened up in the admin tool or used the WMI scripting or our command line tools that we ship, they'll see those settings. So the beauty is if you don't want to see XML, you never have to see XML, but you now have the flexibility of this kind of portable file format where you can very easily go ahead and copy it, your applications and the configuration and the code in one sweep. Makes it much easier to deploy.
One of the other great advantages of having these distributed configuration files as well is when you get ready to scale out the application, you want to have multiple front-end web servers serving this particular website. You can actually copy the content and the configuration onto a file server and have those front-end web servers reference that single point for both the content and the configuration for the site. So you don't have to worry about replicating all of the site configuration across all those front-end web servers. So it makes scale out easier as well. So that's how easy it is to both use a UI and an XML file to configure IIS. Let me show off one other thing, that gallery that I showed off with my images. We can go ahead and click on that, and there we go. We see the error again. Same problem, because I don't have a default document in this case, right? I have just a bunch of images. So how do I enable the directory listing in IIS? Well, I could use the admin tool to do it, or if I'm a brave developer, I can actually come in here and type in the XML myself. So directory enable equals true, directory browse enable equals true. Save that, come back into our page and refresh. And
it still didn't work.
If I didn't type it incorrectly, bold equals true, it tells me actually the configuration error. See how easily I was able to diagnose that? It tells me the problem. I can refresh, and there we go. We get our directory listing.
And where would you change that in the UI version of it?
We can go see that actually. Let's go back to our UI. Here's the default document. Hit the back button. Here's directory browsing. So we can click on that. And we see it's currently enabled, so I can disable it here if I want, and I can change some particular options on it right there. So it's very easy to do both in the GUI experience as well as in the XML file itself. One of the things that we also talked about earlier is the extensibility of IIS 7 and how we've made it so that not only is IIS very modular, but if you don't like one of our modules, you can actually rip it out and plug in your own module. Scott gave the example of directory listing. So for example, we have this directory listing here. It looks pretty much the same as IIS 6 did and IIS 5.
It looks very pretty. I'm right from the command line. I don't see the command line often enough, you know, so.
Yeah, we haven't been doing a lot in terms of directory listing to make it any better. And so I took on the challenge a while back to actually build a replacement module for this directory listing feature itself. We can go ahead and deploy that pretty easily. I'm going to go ahead and minimize the site and go back to our www root. What I've got is an app code directory here that I will deploy. In my app code directory, I can actually deploy my modules in source code form. And what IIS and ASP.NET 2 is dynamically compile these modules on the fly. It's a great developer experience because I can sit here and actually tweak the code for my module without having to recompile it every time and then redeploy it. IIS and ASP.NET take care of that for me. So I'll deploy those modules. The next thing we need to do is configure them. So I'm going to back up into my web.config file. Of course, I could do this through the GUI as well, but I'm going to show it through configuration. I'm going to open up this snippet of configuration to make it a little bit easier on myself, so I don't have to type quite as much. I've got some app settings here. My module, this particular module, doesn't use extended configuration section. It uses this app settings section to store common settings. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that, and we'll plug that into my configuration file. The next thing I need to copy as well is the modules section itself and the handlers section. This is basically what's adding my module to the list of modules that IIS recognizes for my website.
So this is a managed module written in C#. And the beauty is, you know, you now have, when you plug in that module, you can do anything that one of the built-in IIS modules can do.
So if you want to install that through the GUI, would you have to now go back to the add remove program sorts of things and somehow click on that standpoint?
Yeah, this particular module is a custom module that I'm building basically as a developer. So I would need to go to the Windows setup experience to do that. I do it in the IIS admin tool itself. I can actually open up the source code for my module here. List module, you'll see this is a C# code, and it is implementing the existing HTTP module interface that exists today for ASP.NET applications, but now is possible to implement this particular module, and I can now plug it into IIS directly. Something I've never been able to do before. So now that we've got those two configuration settings set, go ahead and save my config file. We can open back up our web browser and refresh the page. And instead of IIS getting the request and the built-in module putting out this directory listing format, my module will get the request and output slightly different looking HTML.
In fact, a little bit different.
Better looking HTML, I think. Yeah, now we see the gallery as it was meant to be viewed with thumbnails and everything. One of the other cool things you maybe saw with the handler mappings that I did here, I mapped not only an image handler that knows how to do the thumbnail preview, but I also mapped this RSS handler. Basically, I've written code to output the directory listing not only in HTML format that we saw earlier, but also RSS format, XML format as well. And IE 7 recognizes that right here. So I can go ahead and click on the RSS view, and here we go. Now we have a directory listing in RSS format, and I can do the filtering, like look at just Cannon Beach images, if I type it correctly, and there we go. Very cool extensibility for IIS 7, all doing managed code.
And the beauty is also this particular one, because it's using managed code, you can use code access security to protect it. You can even go ahead and copy this web.config file and this app onto your, say for example, that GoDaddy account that you have for a couple of dollars a month, and you could actually replace assuming they allowed you to do it, you basically replace the directory listing module on that remote server. And so if you're building your own site, you can get it all working locally, open up an FTP client, or use the built-in FTP client in Windows and just copy it onto that remote system, and even take that same admin tool and connect over HTTP over the internet and manage, using that delegated administration, that app remotely, which is pretty powerful and something you definitely can't do today.
And could we show just briefly in the UI tool how to have done the same thing you did in the XML? Just so that people that are more familiar with the UI tool know how to do that?
You bet. We can come up here to our default website and go to the modules feature. And you'll see here a list of all the modules that are currently installed. In fact, my DurList module that we configured through the XML is available right here. I can click Edit. And here we go, the DurList module and the type that we configured in XML available right here.
Mm-hmm. So all the settings you did in XML are now visible from a UI standpoint.
Yep.
And all you can do, you could just add new modules in there if you needed to.
Yeah. And the beauty is the format round trip. So whatever you type in the text file, if you're an Emacs kind of guy and you prefer kind of a text editor in order to manage your configuration, great. If you're a GUI kind of guy and you want to do it through a GUI admin tool, great. You can have each of those people working on the same server together, and everything round trips, everything works together. And if you want to make a quick surgical edit, you can certainly pop open the text editor. If you want to use a nice validation-based GUI tool, you can do it that way as well. So.
Then you wouldn't have had that whole problem with enable versus enabled, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. You can even go ahead and manage everything through a command line tool.
Yeah.
That's built into the product. So you don't even have to write custom WMI scripts. You can certainly do it that way as well. But we also have a built-in command line tool that lets you go ahead and set or retrieve any setting, just by typing things on the command line.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll demonstrate that a little bit earlier, actually, a little bit later on.
Yeah.
A little bit later on when we get to the diagnostic section, because there's some pretty cool command line capabilities for diagnostics as well. So we've deployed a new module that replaces a built-in IIS module, extended IIS, very easily using C# code. One of the things that I thought might be cool to show off as well is how you can use existing modules, so ASP.NET modules, for all types of requests. So for example, in this case, we've got a directory listing that's being generated by my C# module. Wouldn't it be cool if I could also password protect this website, static file website and a directory listing, using forms authentication, a feature that today only works for ASP.NET pages itself? Well, with IIS 7, I can do that fairly easily. All we need to do is, first thing I'll do actually is configure forms authentication. I'm going to also drag in this login ASPX page. It's the login form, basically, that I need. This is basically a very simple page using the login control that ASP.NET 2.0 has. Let's go ahead and configure the application for forms authentication. I've got some XML right here in my snippet file. I'm just going to copy. And we'll go ahead and paste it in. You'll see basically this says turn on forms authentication, and then I'm configuring as a membership provider, an XML membership provider. I actually deployed this provider earlier when we deployed the app code directory. You'll see XML membership provider right here in the app code directory. And then I'm going to set my authorization rules, and right now I'm only going to allow bill access. So allow users equals bill.
Hey Scott, we're being left out.
Deny everyone else. This is my development server. I'll open up to you guys once I get it done. Now the next question is, how do I create that bill user using that XML membership system? Well, the great news with IIS 7 is we have built-in UI support for managing users and roles. So we can come back to our website here, and here we go, membership users and roles. So we can just go ahead and go into membership users. And assuming I did save the config file that I pasted in, did we save that? Let's go back real quick and make sure I save it. Looks like it wasn't. Let's refresh that. Oh, one other step I actually failed to do. One of the XML membership provider stores the users in the app data directory. So I'm going to go ahead and deploy that app data directory. It'll need that pre-created. So I'll go ahead and refresh the page. And now it's ready to go. One of the tasks I have is add a user. So we'll create the bill user, bill@ms.com email, and give it a quick password. There we go. I've now created a user for my website.
So the beauty about this is, one of the big features in ASP.NET 2.0 was this membership and role management system.
Yeah.
And the way we designed it was to be provider-driven, which means that you can plug in your own implementation. So we just shipped a few weeks ago all of the source code for the built-in implementations that we ship in ASP.NET. But people have built MySQL ones, they built Oracle ones, they built DB2 ones that integrate with LDAP and all that stuff. And so it's very easy to plug it in, and any of the membership and authentication APIs will then go through it. What we're now doing is providing an admin tool on it. So that regardless of whether you're using an XML provider or a SQL provider or an Active Directory provider or a MySQL provider, this admin tool is going to let you manage those roles and those users and create create new people on the system directly. And again, if you're managing this on a remote hoster, you'll be able to take this admin tool, point it across the internet, and assuming the hoster is giving you delegated admin privileges for your app, you can go ahead and manage the users and roles for your hosted app on that $2 or $3 a month account.
So let's go ahead and check it out now, make sure it's working. We'll come back to our website here and refresh the page. And instead of getting the directory listing like we did last time, we now get the login form. So I can go ahead and type in Bill and the password that we generated earlier. And there we go, we're back on, authenticated now as the Bill user, seeing my directory listing. So that's using an existing ASP.NET feature to password protect all types of content, in this case, a directory listing or a static file page. That's going to make ASP.NET developers, I think, very happy now. Makes basically them even more powerful than before. I guess the last thing I wanted to show off is some of the diagnostic capabilities that we talked about really being important for IT professionals to open up that black box, make it much easier to find out what's going wrong in the system. And as I promised earlier, I'm going to do that using classic ASP. So we'll come back to our home directory here and create a new ASP page. Let's call this guy badguy.asp. And open him up. And I'm going to write some really bad code that I know none of our developers ever write, but it illustrates the point really well. It's basically an infinite loop in ASP. And we'll save that one. And the next thing we want to do is come in here and hit that bad guy.asp. And we notice if we bring up Task Manager now, W3WP, the process that serves this website, is at 97% CPU, and it's staying there.
It's getting good workout.
So it's working real hard, spinning around that loop. Now, in previous versions of IIS, if this happens, and it does happen, more often than not, it's really hard to tell what's going on. It's really hard to even know, what request is causing that particular error. If this is a production server, I might have hundreds or even thousands of requests going on simultaneously, and I have no idea which one is causing the problem. With IIS 7, we now have both command line and GUI tools that let you peek inside the web server and see what's going on. So I'll use the command line version first. The command line tool is called appcmd, and this tool, you can see, does a lot. It's kind of a Swiss Army knife for IIS 7. It lets you configure all the configuration settings from sites and applications and modules.
For some reason, it actually feels nice to me to know that we're still writing command line tools. Just, sometimes you want to get back to the command line.
It also lets you query things like state information. So, for example, I can do appcmd list worker process WP. And it's going to show me I have one worker process currently serving the default app pool, and here's its PID. But I can also do appcmd list request. Appcmd list request. And it shows me, assuming I didn't time out. Oh, look, the script timed out finally. So there are no requests. Let's go ahead and refresh that page. List request. And there we go. It shows us the request information. In this case, I only have one request going on, so it's pretty easy to narrow in on the problem. But you can imagine this in IT, in a production environment being much more difficult. And one of the things that we see here is the lapse time on the request. So we can keep refreshing, and we can see that the lapse time on this particular request continues to grow, whereas other pages on the server should be turning around pretty frequently.
Right.
So it's easy to narrow in and say, hey, it must be this bad guy ASP. Now, the next step here, logically, is to say, what led up to that failure? Is it in the ASP page itself? Is it a step along the way? Could it be authentication that's hanging or something else? One of the things that we've done with IIS 7 to make it much easier to kind of narrow in on where in the request the problem is happening is this feature called failed request tracing. So we come back to our UI here, and you'll see failed request tracing rules is one of the features we have. We can go ahead and click on that. And we can add a rule to tell IIS basically the kind of error conditions that we want to look out for. And when it sees the error condition that meets our rule, it'll basically dump an event log of all the things that happened during the request that led up to the problem. So let's add a new rule to trace for ASP pages. We can give it either status codes to look out for. So we were saying earlier 403 errors or 500 errors. We can put those, or we can say time taken. So in this case, let's use a time taken rule of, say, 5 seconds. We'll uncheck the status code. So if the request takes longer than 5 seconds, IIS will log the trace information. On this page, we tell it what kinds of events to log. So we're going to log all the web server events, as well as the classic ASP events. We'll click Finish. And now we have that rule added. You'll notice Visual Web Developer popped up and said, hey, the config file changed. Do you want to look at it again? So I'll say yes. And we can come back into our web.config, and you'll see that trace configuration we just added was added to my file.
And so that's what Scott was talking about, round tripping. You changed it in the UI config and automatically round tripped back to the text file.
Exactly. So now we can come back to our page, and it timed out again. But before we go there, actually, let me pop up the log file directory so we can see the log file being generated as we go. It's in inetpub, logs, failed request logs, and then there's a subdirectory for each site. Right now we've got basically one log file in here and an XSLT file. So if we go ahead and refresh the page now, in about 5 seconds, we should see that rule fire, and we should see a log file get generated. There we go. Log file 2 is generated. And if I double click that, we'll see, as soon as my CPU gets a little...
That's right, you guys got that loop kind of taking a lot of time from you.
To speed things up, I'm going to come in here and stop that process from taking all the CPU cycles. There we go, here's the log file. And we notice it gives us lots of diagnostic information, like the request that was captured, what app pool it was running in, what type of user was being used to run the request, the time taken before this log file was generated. In this case, it's a little bit over 5 seconds. And then we can see really detailed information into what happened during the request. So we can see, when IIS got the request. We can see each module that intercepted the request along the way. We can go all the way down to the bottom and see the last event that happened before the log file was captured is the ASP script trace start event. And that means basically ASP got the request and started running the script that we had. So at this point, it's really clear exactly where the request got to before it hung, basically.
Now that we have all this data and it's stored in XML files, we'll be able to build richer tools that you can run to actually say, oh, based on, this dump, this is the problem. And if you ever do need to, call product support, or you ever, really get stuck, you can call in an expert, and they can basically look at the XML file or the report itself and pinpoint exactly where the problem is, what caused it. Was it, some authentication failed, or some cert failed somewhere earlier in the stack, or was it, in this case here, a runaway script?
Or a bad guy script.
Yeah, or a bad guy script, yeah.
And I just got to change the name to goodguy.asp and everything's
Exactly,
fine, right?
yeah.
I mentioned earlier you can see that request information both in the GUI and the command line. Let me show you that real quick. Here's the worker processes feature in the GUI tool. We can pull that up. Here we see the same information, default app pool running, and click View Current Requests. And assuming our script didn't time out again, it times out at the perfect time, doesn't it? Refresh the page and refresh the UI, and there we go. We see the same information here in the GUI tool as well. So if you'd prefer a GUI, you got that too.
Lots of options.
Yep.
I mean, it sounds like we've really covered a lot of the issues that the IT pro people, as well as the developers, have been asking for a lot of times, in making sure that IIS was constantly keeping up to date with what they were needing their websites to do and the management of their websites to be able to accomplish.
Yeah, I'd say that's exactly right. For IT professionals, it's all about control. They want to control what the footprint of their server is and which features are actually installed and enabled, so they can control the attack surface of the server and control their servicing footprint as well. It's about controlling, giving limited control to site owners and developers so that they can hand off some of that responsibility in cases where they don't need it. And for the developers, it's all about flexibility and extensibility, right? If I don't like the way IIS does directory listings, I can rip that module out and plug in my own. It's about giving them XML file access to configuration for IIS settings so they can easily tweak it along with their ASP.NET ones.
Now, would you recommend that IT pro people who are basically perfectly fine with their existing version of IIS 7 or IIS 6 that they're running today, also upgrade to IIS 7, or is this for people that are taking and adding new services onto their systems?
I'd recommend IIS 7 for both, actually. I think you're going to see a tremendous amount of improvements, both in terms of the diagnostics capabilities we've seen here, but also a lot new features that will be built on top of this platform. They'll be available in the community and on www.is.net.
Are there any compatibility issues that they should be concerned about? Because I know when you switch from ASP to ASP.NET, there were some compatibilities, and that's why we changed the name to ASPX files, and you would gradually take and move your files across. Or could I just take my existing ASPX files and just have everything work perfectly fine?
And we realize compatibility is going to be a huge issue if there's a high bar to get to IIS 7. So we've worked really hard to make sure that not only existing applications, whether they're ASP or ASP.NET applications, can just be copied basically onto the IIS 7 server and run without any code changes. But we've also looked at administration scripts. So if you've used old Metabase scripts that exist today that configure IIS through the Metabase, we've also implemented support so that those scripts can continue to run against the new configuration system as well.
I think that's a positive step.
Yeah.
And I think because that's one of the big concerns people have every time they upgrade, things happen. And it sounds like you've dealt with most of the issues so things don't happen, other than with the things you want to have happen.
We want to make it as easy as possible to get there. Yep.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us. I'm sure that you provided some great information on what IIS 7.0 is going to provide for users once they upgrade to Windows Vista or Longhorn Server, install IIS 7.0 on their systems, and just pull that crank and start working on these things.
Thanks for letting us come today.
Yeah, this should be fun.
So hopefully that illustrated to you why IIS 7.0 is such a groundbreaking advancement in the Internet Information Services capabilities that you can take and use in your systems. Whether you're an IT pro or a developer, I think that these capabilities are things that you're going to want to take and have as soon as it's available. Thanks for joining us.
With me today is Tracy Lovejoy. She is an ethnographer with the Mobile and Embedded Devices team. Tracy, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So when I first saw your title, I thought that is so interesting. I had no idea Microsoft had such a position here. So why don't you tell us what that means for Microsoft, ethnographer, and also for your job in general?
Absolutely. So I want to start by saying I definitely have the best job at Microsoft, the most fun job, and they pretty much pay me to do my hobby, go out around the world and spend time with our customers, which is great. So ethnography is a discipline that comes out of anthropology, which is essentially the study of people and cultures. This lends very well when you think about product development context, because today at Microsoft, the center of their strategy is to make sure that people are right in the center of all product development. That first we think about people, their environments, their context, their behaviors. We want to understand that deeply and how we can improve their lives, as the new mission, Realizing Potential, really ties into that. And so ethnographers and anthropologists around Microsoft, currently there are about 10 of us, work to really put people at the center of that strategy. So I was in Windows for 5 years. I'm now sitting, as you mentioned, in the Mobile and Embedded Devices division, the mouthful, and working to think about what are people doing, what are their values, what are their behaviors every day within the context of environments like home, like work, in different regions and countries around the globe, and then how do we think about the intersection with technology? So where are the tools that they're using? Where does the mobile phone fit into their lives? And then how do we empower them in better ways using these technologies to meet the needs that they aspire to meet?
Okay, so what's an average day like for you? You said you do a lot of travel.
I do, yeah. There's no average day. I think for any Microsoft employee, we tend to have a zillion jobs in one. But really, there's two phases that I'm in. I'm either fielding a study, or I'm back at Microsoft helping the development team infuse that deep, rich understanding of the user into everyday product development. And so for in the study, in the field, that's definitely the most fun. So that's when we're out with our customers and I act like a shadow. So seriously, I have a notebook and a pen and I walk around behind people all day long shadowing what they're doing. So taking photographs to document it, taking notes to document it, having a video camera, and then at appropriate intervals asking them questions, because you try really hard not to interrupt the flow of their day. So then once we're done fielding a study, we come back, we look through the notes, we look through the photographs, we look through the video, and we begin to create frameworks of how we can use this information and put it in very consumable chunks of information to bring back to the product and development teams, because You can't just give them 700 pages of field notes and 3,000 pictures. You have to be able to whittle this down to something meaningful. So we come back and we have lots of different communication strategies, and that's the second part of then what we do is infusing that, as I said, into the product team.
Okay. Can you give a specific example in the past where something you learned affected a new feature or outcome of a product?
Sure. It's the hard thing is that the work that we do is part of IP. And the product that I worked the longest on yet has not yet shipped, which is Vista. So to some extent, we still have to be careful with what we say. But I can tell you about one study that I did early on and some of the ways that it filtered in and what we can see in Vista today pre-ship. So early on in Vista planning and early in a product cycle is a place that anthropology and ethnography has a lot of value to add, because it's that time when you really need to define who your customer is, deeply look at all of those elements that we've discussed. And so early on in Vista planning, we knew that people who worked in very large organizations and enterprises were an important target for the Vista team. So I headed a 2-year-long study following about 15 people throughout that time, thinking about these things. What are their daily lives like? What are their behaviors? What are their tools? What are their pain points? How do we think about making their lives better through empowerment? And there were really 3 key areas that fell out that we saw. One was people can't find their files in file management. Not a new problem, but really got to see in detail what was happening there. A second area was communications and collaboration. And then a third area was thinking about people moving between spaces or mobility. So in Vista, what we see is an evolution in the way that file management is done. And a lot of that comes out of this deep ethnographic work, thinking about how do people conceptualize what file management means? What are the categorizations that are important? Thinking of people, for example, or location-based or dates or projects. Because previous to that, there was really just a dual way that we could file and find files, which was the place that we save it on the computer and the name that we give them. And it didn't give the rich context that people themselves infuse into their file system. So you see that a lot come out in Vista.
Right. Okay. So when you were talking, it made me think that it sounds like what you do has a little bit of crossover, or a lot of crossover with usability teams.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that the inclusion of ethnography and anthropology comes directly from the great work that usability teams have done. Usability started at Microsoft about 1985, and what you saw was that it came in very late in the product cycle. And when I make the circle with product cycle, it's because we have kind of the milestones that we go through that a lot of teams follow roughly. So that's kind of what I'm meaning here. Usability was brought in at the end to make sure that there wasn't anything so broken that it was okay to put it out on the market. But what they saw was that that wasn't early enough, because clearly at that point there's not a lot you can change other than put the blue button here or over there. That, you know, this is not such a bug that we're not going to be able to move forward. So they started pushing a lot of research towards the beginning of the product cycle to answer some of the fundamental questions that teams had that went beyond, is this broken? So things, you know, started moving backwards, asking questions more like, well, what is it that users really want? Right? And then that question gets pushed back to, well, what is it that customers are actually doing today with the products that we put out there? So usability is much more a lab type environment where you bring people in, it's a bit artificial, you have them do a task list, but it doesn't give the rich information of what is it like for people using their own information, sitting in their own home, trying to deal with the fact that the kids are running around. How does that work? How are people using our products in ways we never even thought they would? What are the workarounds? Where does that break down? And those are the questions that fieldwork and ethnography really get at. So closely related, and still we're a very close ally. So I actually sit on a team that's user research and design, and so many of my colleagues are usability engineers.
Okay, makes sense. So did you go to school for anthropology?
I went to school, my master's at the University of Chicago was an interdisciplinary social science program that focused in anthropology and ethnography.
Okay, so you're one of the few people that's actually doing what they went to school for.
That's absolutely true, and it is a very focused area, and so all of the anthropologists across the company do have training in that area.
Great. So what are some things you like to do outside of work?
Outside of work. Travel is by far my biggest hobby, and so that's why I mentioned earlier that it's fun that I kind of get paid to do what I love. In my normal life, I love to ask people questions and kind of figure out what's going on and understand what's important to them. But in real life, that's considered intrusive. So it's nice that in my job, I'm paid to do that and people don't think I'm totally crazy to do it, so that's fun. And outside of traveling and getting to know people on that individual level, I love to spend time with my pets. I love to go to the dog park, and I'm an aspiring guitar player.
Really?
So I am.
What
yeah.
kind of music do you play? What kind of guitar?
Right now, I play the intro to guitar playing music that's like G, 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 A. So I don't play a lot now, but for my birthday last year, I did get the chord book of the Beatles and of Pink Floyd. So I've
There
been
you go.
kind of diving to those, which is pretty exciting.
There you go. There's a lot to choose from there.
Exactly.
So what kind of dogs do you have?
I have 2 Stabyhounds, which is a breed that nobody in the world has ever heard
Yeah.
of. So, if you haven't heard of
What
it,
is
it's
it?
not a big deal. It's a Dutch breed that is like the perfectly genetically engineered dog that is the perfect size and completely loving, and they shed sparingly. Once they get dirty, they kind of lose the dirt because their hair doesn't hold on to the dirt.
Weird.
So they're a very nice
It's in the
dog.
hound family?
They're a working dog, so they
Okay.
were a retriever and whatever the other half of that is. I don't know.
Oh,
But
that's great.
We're
So they're
glad
about
not
this
a
big?
herder. The female is 28 pounds and the male's close to 40 pounds. And we have 2 cats, which are lovely as well.
Oh, that's great. So it keeps you busy.
It sure does.
That's
it sure
great.
does.
So do you see yourself staying long in this group, sounds like?
I've just moved over, and I really do believe that mobile phones and mobile technologies are the future of where Microsoft will move. One of the things that I always saw in the Windows division was that the center of people's technology ecosystem is their mobile phone. So Microsoft tends to put the computer at the center of that picture. But when you study human behavior, you see that in people's lives, the reality is that it's the phone, and that a PC is an important accessory to the phone, but it really is the phone that drives people's relationship with technology. And so I am excited to get into the group and help think about directing that strategy. The team that I sit on within design and research is a very new type of team. It's called a UX strategy team. And so we are helping to bridge the gap between a lot of the big marketing data sets that we get that talk about things at kind of that high level, and be able to infuse the details that make it actionable at the product and development level, and really help the teams think about who are the populations we should focus on. How do we do that? How do we do that in a meaningful way moving forward? And it's a new model for Microsoft, so it's exciting to be a part of that.
That does sound exciting. Well, Tracy, thanks so much for joining me today.
It was lovely to talk with you. Thanks for having me.
And that brings us to the end of another episode of the .NET Show.
And stay tuned for the next episode on DSI.
DSI, what's that stand for?
I don't know, you tell me.
I guess we'll have to wait till next time and see.
You'll just have to watch to
Okay.
find out.
And until then, we'll see you on the web.